Welcome to the great Hearthstone world of space and the great dark beyond. And these are the top 5 best decks in the entire expansion. In today's video, we're going to break down the Hearthstone meta, take a look at what old decks might be still lurking around, but we're mostly going to be focusing on the new decks that are possible within the Great Dark Beyond expansion. There are still a lot of old decks like Nostalgia Shaman, Big Spell Mage, and to a lesser extent, Odyn Warrior, which kind of runs some new cards, that are still lurking around and are still kind of ruling the meta in some aspects. But what's going on right now is we're seeing a lot of changes, especially within the past 3 days, of archetypes emerging, seeing what sticks, and seeing if there's any decks that can actually deal with some of these threats from the past. So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with today's meta breakdown, because on HSReplay, Mage is on top, followed by Warrior at a 52%. The only classes that are above a 50% and barely doing so are Shaman, Hunter, Death Knight, and Druid. Druid very recently hit above 50% overnight, because I believe this class was below a 49% not too long ago, so there are some things that are emerging for Druid. Paladin has completely fallen below a 50% win rate, which feels like the first time in forever, while Warlock, Demon Hunter, and Priest are some of the worst classes in the game, with Rogue yet again being on the bottom, because I feel like nobody understands what exactly they want for this class, except for people at top 1000 Legend, to where there are some really interesting Rogue decks emerging. And just to let you guys know, there will at least be a deck for every single class in the game, so that way if there is a class that you really want to see if it's powerful or not, I tried my best in order to include at least one new deck from every single class. So with all of that out of the way, what's actually on top of the meta? Because unfortunately, if you've been watching these videos already, I have not exactly been preaching the good news of the new cards yet, because old archetypes are still on top. Even though they might run some new cards, the general idea of these decks is still almost exactly the same. There is Rainbow Shaman, there is Dungar Druid, which does actually run the Splitting Space Rock card for extra, stats and chonky ability. We love chonky decks over here at twitch.tv/HELLSCREAM. Make sure to check out the stream if you have some time. But yeah, Big Spell Mage, Elemental Mage is one of the new decks. Odyn Warrior, which has like one new card in it. Evolve Shaman, which is just Rainbow Nostalgia Shaman. Razzle Dazzle Death Knight with buttons is still absolutely killing it. In my opinion, Pipsi Paladin still the best deck in the game, and we'll support this with a claim later on. But yeah, Highlander Death Knight, Dummy Warrior, which I haven't even seen at all since the expansion's gone live. Breakfast Hunter, Double Frost on Holy Space Death Knight, which if you watch my video coming out about this after this video comes out, this isn't right, because it's not giving us the right cards. It is actually a rainbow deck that it keeps recommending, and I'm not really sure why. And now that I'm actually looking, yeah, right here, dude, Double Frost Unholy, and there's a Threads of Despair. So this is the funny thing about trusting these websites sometimes. But the very last class is Pirate Demon Hunter with almost no new cards, even though I do have a Starship Demon Hunter I will be sharing with you guys. But to show off the rest of the tier list, and there's a reason why I'm actually going through each individual tier here. There's Elemental Shaman, Taunt Warrior, Blood Control Death Knight with, I believe, the 8 stars from Beyond, which I'm not really seeing it in the... Oh, yeah, here it is right here. Dollhouse Druid, Wheel Warlock, Spell Token Druid, Hand Warlock, Miracle Rogue, which I believe is just Insidious Psycho Rogue, Discover Hunter, and then the very bottom of the HSReplay tier list, we have Highlander Warrior, Battlecry Shaman, Asteroid Shaman, as I like to call it, Libram Paladin, which I can't believe is a tier 4 deck, and then at the very bottom is Quasar. So the one thing to keep in mind about all of these decks emerging is that these are all the decks that people have actually been playing enough to where the HSReplay data is able to actually see it pop up and give it a legitimate number, which is why sometimes you have like these discrepancies with the Double Frost Unholy deck. But now if we take a look at the actual decks that people are playing in Legend, you're going to see a massive shift in some of the archetypes, not in all of them. Dungar Druid, Big Spell Mage, Elemental Mage, and the Shaman still on top. We have relatively the exact same decks that were in tier 2. Dollhouse Druid gets a little bit better. Miracle Druid gets a slight bit better. Discover Hunter, Highlander Warrior, all these other slower control decks start getting worse. Wheel Warlock actually increases a little bit, but all of these other decks are just not good. Space Warlock, Starship Warlock, which I assumed would be the worst Starship deck, is actually turning out to be true, but at the same time, there's not a Space Rogue that's popping up, so that kind of makes me sad. But yeah, going into the Legend at top 1000 Legend within the Hearthstone, within the HSReplay tiers, still almost the exact same decks that you are seeing, which makes me question how exactly this data is collected. Rainbow Shaman, Evolve Shaman, Elemental Mage, Big Spell Mage falls pretty far down, which I don't really understand, as Dummy Warrior gets even better, Spellburst Rogue comes out of nowhere, Handbuff Paladin comes out of nowhere. I really don't understand where these stats are coming from, and that's why I've been harping on this as long as I have, because when you take a look at the most popular decks in Diamond through Legend, for example, you have Elemental Mage, Odyn Warrior, the new Wheel Warlock, which is getting a lot of attention, Quasar Rogue, which has gotten a lot of attention, Taunt Druid, actually. This is Taunt Kill Odyn Druid. Another Quasar Rogue, more Dungar Druid, Highland. Like, where are these other decks like Handbuff Paladin that they were talking about? Like, I just don't understand where exactly this data is coming from, which is why we always consult two websites, because you never know if there is some websites that just have some data anomalies, where if you see two of the same, sets of data in two different websites, you can kind of assume that it's a little bit more true. Case in point, Shaman being on top of the meta. I really don't understand. There's not that many games with the deck compared to everything else that people are playing, but this is one of the old decks that is still lingering, that is absolutely smacking everything and everybody, especially because these are all of the ranks in Hearthstone right here. We'll take a look at specific decks here in a second, in specific legend brackets. But yeah, Pipsi Paladin, Big Spell Mage, Buttons DK, Elemental Mage, Odyn Warrior, somehow Zarimi Priest. I don't understand how that's happening. Who is playing Zarimi Priest? But then as we take a look at Diamond through Legend, it's essentially the exact same order here, with Dungar Druid kind of making an emergence. But then when we change things up a little bit, Cycle Rogue comes out of nowhere with a good win rate, Pirate Demon Hunter comes out of nowhere with a decent win rate, Mystery Egg Hunter, and even this Aggro Priest, which we will be talking about later in the video. But then at top 1000 Legend, there's only so many archetypes that have emerged, to where you have Pipsi Paladin, Elemental Mage, Cycle Rogue, Big Spell Mage, and Odyn Warrior sitting as the best decks within the game. So now that I've shown you guys the data that I have pulled from in order to make this list, and I've already talked about, for example, Big Spell Mage is not going to be in this video on my list, but it's still a good deck you could play. You could play Nostalgia Shaman. There's a lot of these other decks that I haven't included, like also Spell Damage Druid, to where if you want to play these archetypes, go ahead. They're still going to work. But for the rest of this video, we are primarily going to be focusing not only on good decks, but decks that have new cards in them. So with all of that out of the way, let's actually take a look at the decks themselves, because Elemental Mage being number one, who would have assumed that? If you've been playing Hearthstone these past couple of days, you know just how good this combo is. And if you've been living under a space rock, let's go ahead and tell you what the combo is. So there are two ways that you can essentially play this deck. You have the tempo game plan, which we've all seen before. We saw Rarin hit, Legend on a free-to-play account with Elemental Mage. Lamplighter, still a good card. But now we have an additional high roll that has been added into the deck with Sarun, however you want to pronounce it, to where you can have all of your elementals in your deck have +1 fire spell damage, including, and most importantly, your Overflow Surger, to where if you play an elemental every single turn and then play this when it has the spell damage on it, it will summon 6 other copies that also have +1 spell damage, giving you +7 spell damage, making your Molten Runes deal 20 if it's forged, making your Solar Flares deal 9, your Flame Geysers dealing 9, and your Spontaneous Combustions dealing 11. So there is a lot of damage that this deck can pull out of nowhere, to where not even DKs can out-armor this. But there's one thing to keep in mind. If you draw your Surgers, this kind of high roll completely and utterly sort of falls apart, to where you still have like a bunch of 1-drops in your deck that you can play all at once to try and get these, these gigantic spell burst combos out of nowhere. But the one thing to keep in mind is that without the Oasis Surger putting this all together, this combo falls extremely flat. So when you draw this card, suddenly you have to actually focus on your game plan and your tempo. But this is a classic example of where on ladder, your opponent's gonna play this on turn 4, followed by the Surger gonna be in their deck for sure, and then you're just gonna get bursted with Molten Rune and one other spell to just absolutely destroy you. So this is just the best deck in the game if you want to play some new cards and actually climb the ladder, but this is also going to be the most common deck that you could probably disrupt if you just out-tempo it. Next up, we have Odyn Warrior, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, but the reason why I have to put it at number 2 is because this deck is just the deck that completely bullies a lot of new archetypes, to the point where people are starting to run Wheel Warlock and other versions of OTK decks in order to make sure that they can beat up on these types of warriors and armor decks, because it's not just Warrior that's getting a lot of armor, it's Druid, it's Hunter to a lesser degree, and it's also Death Knight. So there's a lot of decks that are gaining a lot of life. So like, having an OTK deck that can deal more than 30 damage is kind of important, which is why at top legend you're seeing a lot of decks like Spell Damage Druid, for example, with like Elonius because that deck was already super common at the beginning of the expansion, but now that Warrior's starting to pop off, more people are running Owl in their deck as an actual like win condition instead of just running the spell damage cards like the Chia Drake, for example. With Owl, you kind of need to be able to, you know, out armor this deck, because with the new card that has been added into this list, it is very good at dismantling aggro decks. Hostile Invader is a Battlecry Spellburst and Death Rattle deal 2 damage, to where this could easily just be a deal 4 damage as soon as it hits the field, which I feel like AoE is just getting absolutely crazy nowadays with how effective and efficient it is, because that's one reason why this deck is just zzz, in my opinion. It's just the exact same thing, except we're literally re-seeing the exact same phenomena, to where, you know, you gave this deck an armor tool or an AoE tool, and now we just bump up the deck a little bit and include this one card, and now suddenly it's just the best version of the deck. And even like the mini set, for example, the exact same thing happened. I'm so tired of Odyn Warrior getting literally one card and becoming the best deck because it got an AoE, one armor gain card. I'm so sick of this deck, and I cannot wait for Odyn to rotate, because I want other versions of Control Warrior to be playable. I'm just sick of this card personally. And next up, we have Spell Damage Druid, which hopefully will be one of the last, you know, older decks that finds its way into this list, because so far we're on deck 3, and we're talking about 2 old decks, which really does kind of say a lot. But the reason why I'm showcasing this is because of the inclusion of the Ethereal Oracle in the meta, because this card is just literally going into everything. Everyone keeps asking me, what is the safest legendary to craft? It's actually Ethereal Oracle. That's the safest card to craft from this expansion, because it's going in Paladin, Druid, Rogue, Mage. It's just going into everything because of how versatile drawing 2 cards can be, especially in a deck that has a bunch of 0 mana and 1 mana cards. So yeah, just having Ethereal Oracle in this kind of deck just feels like a big W, because you get consistent card draw and spell damage to help bump up your combo. And even if this is not enough, you still have Alonius in order to deal that ungodly amount of spell damage, especially against those warriors that you definitely need those kind of combos against. So yeah, Spell Damage Druid is probably still an extremely good deck to play, but if you don't like older decks, I would not recommend it. Okay, I kind of lied. There's one more older deck that I still believe is on top of the meta, but it's Pipsi Paladin, and I'm willing to give it a pass because it's Pipsi Paladin and how much I love it. And this deck actually does run 2 new cards in it. One of them isn't necessarily the best, but I mean, it's still got some of the best win rates from what I've seen, and that is the inclusion of Lumia. Because a lot of people are probably wondering, why exactly do we want this in the deck? Well, there's one particular high roll in mind that I thought would be really funny, and the deck is just kind of just loved Lumia in the list just because of all the stats that I've seen with it. It seems to be a pretty decent card. But the main idea of me putting Lumia within the deck was that if I had Sandcastle on turn 5 and I had it within the location, I could play Lumia, immediately give it Rush, and then heal for a bunch of damage out of nowhere. Or I could kill a big minion, for example. So Lumia is also great as like a anti-combo card, for example. Like if you're going up against a Quasar Rogue, even though this deck murders Quasar Rogue, you can play Lumia, and then suddenly your Quasar Rogue opponent is going to have absolutely nothing that they can do until they kill the 9/9. So this being like a tool against aggro, for example, in order to lock them out to where they have to kill the 9/9 before they can go face, healing you in the process. 6 mana 9/9 feels like it should be better than this, in all honesty. But it is still in the deck regardless because of those high rolls. And because this deck sometimes have some very lackluster early games, we decided to put it in here just to kind of give us a little bit more sustain. But the other thing to keep in mind about this deck is that we have Robocaller, including the Ethereal Oracle. Because originally, this deck just couldn't draw its deck very well. But now with Ethereal Oracle in the deck, as well as the Robocallers, which honestly, you could even argue taking out a Robocaller or 2. But yeah, I just like this version of the list because it quickly cycles. You still have your Pipsi thinning out your deck, so the extra card draw is even more important. Pipsi Paladin is the best deck in the game according to HSReplay at the legend ranks, I believe. So this deck is not going anywhere unless they decide to change it up somehow. Next up on the list is finally a deck that utilizes new cards to very efficient levels. Oh my dear lord, I owe an apology to Kil'jaeden because I was like, there is not going to be any deck that is good with Kil'jaeden, but as it turns out, there might be 2 good decks with Kil'jaeden. And this is one of them, for one main reason. You are gaining all of the armor in the world, and you are doing what druids typically do by drawing out your entire deck before you play the Kil'jaeden. I'll hopefully have a video coming out about this in the next couple of days because I actually played this deck yesterday. yesterday and had an insane amount of fun with it, but playing Kill Jaden as early as you can in order to get the biggest demons possible is just not how you want to support this card. The way that you want to support this card is by having a bunch of cards in your hand, like for example, Sleep Under the Stars, Hydration Station, even like an Oaken Summons, for example, because you want to have cards in your hand when you play the Kill Jaden, so that way as the demons are ramping up, you are still doing other things that are keeping your opponent busy, but more importantly, you have card draw and you have other ways of supporting the demons versus just drawing one big demon every single turn. I'm gonna use a Yu-Gi-Oh example as a way of explaining this, but you remember when Yugi was looking at Joey's deck and he's like, nobody can win with these are only monster cards. You need to support your monsters with spells. It is literally the exact same premise with Kill Jaden, because if all you're doing is drawing one big minion every single turn, your opponent is aware that you're gonna play one big minion every single turn. So unless it's like a taunt or something with lifesteal or like something that does something immediately, and we all know how bad random demons can be, then that's just not how you support Kill Jaden. So the reason why this actually works is because we have a bunch of armor that we're gaining from the defense crystal. You can replay the upgraded version of the Starship with Hydration Station. You have Ziliax coming back a whole bunch of times, ENR for healing, all of the ramp in the world, so that way when you do play Kill Jaden, you can probably do something else. But the more important thing is that if you have 16 mana and you draw 2 cards from your deck, you are more likely to play 2 of the big demons, because some demons can be like, like 7 mana, 10 mana. There's probably not a 10 mana demon. Regardless, there are some really big demons, and having that extra, excess mana from the new heights can be very important. Trail Mix is a card I'm not really 100% sold on, to be honest. Just wanted to throw that out there because there might be a better list. But the idea of playing Trail Mix into Crystal Cluster is probably the reason why it's in this deck. So again, gain armor, try to draw out your deck as much as you can. Play the Kill Jaden when you either have to because you might need to tempo it against a wheel deck, for example. I'll go into detail about this when I post the deck guide. I know I just said you're not supposed to tempo Kill Jaden, but there was one game in particular where I actually had to do it, and we did win while doing it. But again, draw out your deck as much as physically possible, play the Kill Jaden when you have a bunch of armor, and then see if random demons can bail you out of a bad situation. And now the last deck that I'm going to talk about that is on top of the meta is unfortunately Psycho Rogue. I'm not going to spend that much time talking about it because this deck was literally the best deck in the format before the new cards hit the meta. And unfortunately, this deck is still very popular to where a lot of people are still playing it. And the only reason why I'm including it is because I love Incendious. This card is really cool, this card is really fun, and this deck is not exactly the easiest thing to play in the world, so there might be some people that were looking at this deck being like, oh man, this is complete bait. How can this be the best deck in the game? Well, I'll explain it to you. The reason why it's the best deck in the game is because if you're going up against warriors and a bunch of armor classes, for example, the Incendious win condition is absolutely game-ending, because if you do your Sonya combo, get another copy of Incendious, shuffle, I think, about 15 embers into the deck, and then you play Cover Artist in order to make them even larger, you just push a lot of damage to where you can easily deal, I believe, 50, 60 damage with this deck if I'm counting correctly. I probably have my math off. But usually you can play Incendious up to 3 times, buff the cards by 3, buff them up to 3 or 4 damage, so that way you can deal 45 or 60 damage, and on top of all the other things that you can do with this deck, especially considering the Grifta combos that are available. But yeah, Psycho Rogue, still very good, and probably going to still be an absolute powerhouse until the new meta pushes this deck out. So now we're going to be talking about the new decks that are possible in order to hit Legend, except we're going to start off with this deck because I would not recommend anybody to play this for 2 reasons. One, this deck has absolutely fallen off to where I tried on my stream yesterday to literally queue into 1 Quasar Rogue, and after 25 games of literally conceding, I only found 1. So this deck has absolutely decreased in popularity. If you're trying to counter it, it's probably not that good of an idea. If you're trying to play it, it is not that good of an idea either, because it is all in on Quasar, and if you're not someone that likes playing solitaire decks, then unfortunately this is just not the deck that I would recommend for you. I have an entire video breaking down this deck that we actually posted yesterday, I believe, so if you want to see just how finicky and how, fickle this deck can be, then go ahead and check out that video. But I don't think I need to give Quasar Rogue any more screen time on what exactly it can do and why exactly it's considered uninteractive and not fun. So in order to start this list off right, we are going to talk about the better rogue combo. Some people would argue that this deck is just as toxic, if not more toxic, because the whole point of this deck is to quickly draw throughout your deck, so that way you can have cards like Tentacle Grip, Own Manager, and Eviscerate available in your hand, because you want these combo cards available so you can discount them with pressure points. Pressure points is deal 3 damage to a minion, reduce the cost of your combo cards in hand by 1 mana, and if you take a look at some of these cards, you have Tentacle Grip, Own Manager, and Eviscerate sitting at 2 mana, which can be discounted to 1 mana, so that way when you play your Sonya combos, it does absolute work. And there's even a Record Scratcher in this deck in order to give you even more potential of playing, you know, literally Sonya into double Tentacle Grip, double Own Manager into, actually, I guess it's triple into all these cards, or actually quadruple if you play every single one of them. So this is 16 damage, 8 damage, followed by another 12 damage. That is absolutely insane if this can work. So yeah, and that's not even including the Ethereal Oracle combos that are also possible with this. So this deck may look really good on paper, but this is a more, I want to say, balanced version of the Quasar deck, because this is a deck that actually needs to interact on the board in order to complete its combo. Case in point, you need to deal 3 damage to a minion. You're probably not going to be killing your own minion, even though you technically could, because you're going up against more decks that will be actively trying to kill you instead of, you know, just sitting there doing a whole lot of nothing. And against the armor decks, I'm not really sure how good this combo can be, but I imagine with like the Record Scratcher, in order to play out like a double Ethereal Oracle with your Sonya, and maybe if we put Grifta into this deck, we can also run the discount card, even though that might get in the way of a couple of other things, but that is something that I am thinking about. You could put Grifta in this deck in order to either go for the damage or go for the discount. Not even that bad of an idea personally, but it may screw up with the consistency of like Elven Minstrel drawing like your Scoundrels or your Sonyas or your Ethereal Oracles, because those are the only minions that are actually in this deck. So having this in the list might screw up a few things. I haven't tested this yet, and the reason we're calling it David Bowie Rogue is because pressure coming down on me, coming down on you. I know, I'm pretty funny. So you should subscribe to the YouTube channel because we have the most hilarious jokes in all of the internet. Next up is Aggro Starship Druid, and honestly, I have only seen Pheno playing this deck. There was a lot of comments in my recent video talking about Quasar where people were like, I don't feel bad for the Druid getting comboed by the Rogue, because Starship Druid had a disgusting turn 4. And honestly, I feel like it's just because of Cultivation. I think Cultivation was the reason why he had that gigantic board. But I feel like it was important to note in this video that I literally have not seen anybody else play this deck. So like, if this is really not that good of a deck and Quasar just took an absolute crap on it, I feel like there's a reason to note that, because unfortunately, if Aggro Druid can't beat a combo deck, that is really saying something. Aggro Druid, the deck that goes wide on the board and plays big minions, can't stick a minion against Rogue? That says a lot, god damn it. But yeah, the whole point of this deck is to play the Starship pieces like like Starlight Reactor, as well as your Cloak Field, so that way you can play cards like Distress Signal, Overgrowth Beanstalk, and all of these other spells a little bit cheaper, and if they are arcane cards, you can potentially play them twice. But the reason why we're only running one Starlight Reactor is because this is not an arcane deck first, it's an Aggro Druid first, which is why we have the Nymph in the deck, we have the Overgrown Beanstalk in order to draw a bunch of cards with all the Tree Ants on the field. This is just literally an Aggro Tree Ant Druid that has a few of the arcane cards, because number 1, it builds board, number 2, it buffs the board, number 3, you have more value from your Flower Child that is possible by getting Ziliax and Cultivation as consistent board buffs, to where these other cards like Distress Signal in order to just summon a board is the only thing that matters, so that way you can make your 1/1 minions into like 3/3s or 5/5s or even bigger. So yeah, this is just an Aggro Druid deck that I feel like a lot more people should be talking about, but for some reason, this deck is just not common at all. And next up, we have Dungar Druid. I already talked about this deck a little bit, but the main reason why we are actually putting it on the list is because number 1, it's a scam deck and it does its job effectively. If you play Dungar, you can pull out 2 new cards, Stargrazer and Splitting Space Rock. And honestly, 8 mana 8/8s that give us even more value with minion pressure, as well as actually having a way of hitting the face. That was one thing that it felt like Dungar Druid was missing, because if you didn't have Factory Assembly Bot, it didn't feel like you had a lot of bursts that could like come out of nowhere. But now that we have Stargazer in the deck, we can actually run Hydration Station, so where we can get even more of the Stargazers, and we can just keep hitting face over and over and over again. So now this deck can not only just get out of control with a bunch of ramp, it can get out of control with a lot of damage that can meaningfully burst down your opponent. I still think that Thunderbringer is a little bit interesting, but if you take a look at the new cards that have been added, Splitting Space Rock and Stargazer are literally a beast for Thunderbringer. So the synergies are just being printed off like illegal money laundered money. I don't know. We're printing money over here in the Hearthstone world, and unfortunately we don't have enough runestones to go around. But yeah, Dungar Druid looking like an actual deck that you can have success with, and luckily it does benefit from the new cards, even though it's only 4 new cards technically. And next up is Wheel Warlock, and before we continue, I just want to preface it that these decks right here are not in any particular order. They're just kind of ordered by classes because we're just going through each class as I had them presented. And the last class we'll go over is DK, because oh my god, there are so many DK decks to talk about. I don't even know where to begin personally. But yeah, Wheel Warlock is looking like a real deck. The one thing that I want to do is to add a Defile into this list, but the Defile lists that I saw with Wheel Warlock were a lot worse than this list, which I believe comes from No Hands Gamer. No Hands Gamer is a Wheel Warlock fan. He loves this deck he just loves everything about it because it's a combo. I mean, it's a combo deck that's essentially rewarding you for playing control. Even though it's not really a combo, it's more of just I win the game, even though you could kind of call that a combo. Regardless, it's a control deck that has a very legitimate win condition that we can support with obvious cards like Sarg, Ziliax, Phantom, but the most important card to talk about now is not Kill Jaden. It's actually not Kill Jaden. Yes, you can play Kill Jaden after Wheel, and if you play Kill Jaden on 7 into turn 8 Wheel, the Wheel will not destroy your deck, because if you destroy any cards within the portal will automatically refill back up to 30. So if you play Kill Jaden into Wheel, you don't have to worry about destroying the demon, so to speak. But the other card we have to talk about in this deck, the other new card, is the Ceaseless Expanse. For one simple reason. We have another Loken High Roll. Oh my god, I was getting so mad against this deck yesterday because it felt like Loken came out almost every other game and it always hit a 15-15 because not only do you have the Phantom in the deck, but you also have the Ceaseless Expanse in order to give you even more copies of 15-15s, to where this deck feels like Hand Warlock with like a late game win condition, because you still have your Dark Alley packs, you still have end games bringing back those gigantic taunts that you have, and you have Forge of Whales still doing absolutely disgusting things that just enables the 15-15 even more, to where that could just literally end the game by itself because you have 30-30 in stats so consistently, man. It's just not fair. But regardless, the late game of the deck is there. If you want to play some Wheel Warlock, you have plenty of support in order to not automatically die when you play this card. So yeah, Wheel Warlock is looking like a real deck again. It's kind of surprising. And up next, we have the only Demon Hunter list that has actually made it onto this video, because unfortunately, Demon Hunter, I just don't really know what they're trying to push with this class, because I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but crewmates, emergency meeting, the Among Us Demon Hunter, it's just not good. I saw maybe one person playing this on the first day, and since then I have not really been seeing this archetype, because playing a bunch of 4/4s really doesn't matter when literally it feels like every other class, like Druid and Mage, have Rising Waves. Warrior now has that card that deals 2 damage plus another 2 damage if you spell burst with it. There's still Warlock removal that is extremely efficient at destroying 4/4s. It just never feels like you could stick these minions. So unfortunately, when it comes to the new cards, you either have to run Starships or you have to run this other card that can maybe be a control tool. I'm not really sure what exactly it's trying to do yet. But there's just not a lot going for Demon Hunter right now, and this is a part of the reason why I don't like the class, at least in the past couple years. Every single Demon Hunter set feels like it's trying to support one archetype, and if that one archetype isn't good, then you really can't play anything else. And the other thing that really sucks is that Starship Demon Hunter, it feels like one of the weakest, because it has to focus on supporting the deck instead of focusing on supporting the starships. And I know that, like, yeah, you want your deck to support itself, but it really feels bad that like Demon Hunter can't go for greedy Starship value to where it would want to run the Exodar, for example, because when you immediately launch the ship, you are only getting, you know, Wind Fury and Rush to where you do have immediate value and you do have ways of buffing your board, but buffing your board is just, you don't need to make a big ship for that. You could easily launch this on like 5 mana if you have like a dangerous Cliffside or something equipped, and if there's like minions that you could trade into, like let's put this situation out there. You play Felfu's Battery on turn 2. You play the turret on 3, and then you play double Sigillus Skydiving on turn 4. Again, this is kind of a Christmas Land circumstance, but just work with me. Then on turn 5, you can launch the Felfuse Battery that has, or you can launch the Starship, which has the Felfuse Battery and the turret. So you get to attack twice if your opponent has 2 minions, and if your Sigillus Skydivings are on the field, then you are going to give your minions +2 attack on 6 minions. So suddenly, that's a lot of damage. That's 18 damage out of nowhere. But the problem with that is that was a hell of a setup, and you're doing actively nothing in the early game in order to kind of enable this, you know, turn 5 Starship high roll. So it's like, this deck is essentially just the typical aggro pirate, but it has the Felfuse Battery in here in order to give your extra, you know, minions attack, which is essentially just another version of Adrenaline Fiend or another version of Treasure Distributor. So it's like, Demon Hunter right now just feels like it has cards, but it doesn't have meaningful archetypes to play from because all the Demon Hunter cards are so lackluster to where they just don't synergize together. So you're pretty much forced to playing Pirate Demon Hunter, and if you want to play something a little bit spicy, you can add the Starships to it. And there was some people that were trying to make Window Shopper work, for example, with the Starships, but it just did not fall. It just did not work, and it just completely fell flat. So Demon Hunter in this expansion, without Among Us Demon Hunter kind of like giving us some variability and some different decks possible for the class, it really feels like Demon Hunter is going to struggle this expansion in terms of new archetypes. And speaking of new archetypes, I have some good news, or maybe bad news, depending on how exactly you look at the Priest class, but there is a new archetype for Priest that has emerged that is actually finally starting to look like it's a decent deck, because when people were trying this on the first day, oh boy, was it bad. There were so many unoptimized versions of this aggro priest, but I had one general idea in mind. It is to use your Anchroite. Anchroite, am I pronouncing this correctly? We're just gonna call him Anchor because he's literally the anchor of this deck, because whenever another minion is overhealed, you give that much extra health to that minion. Fan Club, Funnel Cake, Dreamboat, Hidden Gem. There's a lot of really good healing, AoE healing in this deck that can just create a gigantic board out of nowhere. And this deck has even gone so far as to run a Crazed Alchemist because of how consistently you can make your minions have like 10 HP, 12 HP. I believe I went up against this deck once and they literally had like 15 minions against me, dude. It was absolutely insane. So the idea of running Crazed Alchemist in order to be like a pseudo win condition to where you just run over the board and then you play this when you have enough damage is absolutely hilarious to me. And I don't find Priest decks hilarious until, well, I guess I find them. And I don't usually find Priest decks hilarious, dude. So this is just really funny to me that this kind of archetype is actually a thing, because something else to keep in mind is that you also have Vol'jin. So if your opponent has like a really big minion, you could easily like Vol'jin one of your minions, play Crazed Alchemist, and also go for a lethal that way. So this deck's kind of goofy. It's got some consistency with like, you know, instrument tech to pull out the Trusty Rod in order to pull out your 1-drops, because you have cards like Overzealous Healer. You have we actually aren't running the Fish card. We're not running the Hunter card, Catch of the Day, which is what I was looking for. Probably not a good inclusion in this deck, but always, you know, something to think about whenever you're playing Trusty Fishing Rod. But the rest of this deck does make sense, you know, a lot of overheal stuff. We'll probably play this in the future and do a deck guide on it if it is actually this good, but this is pretty much as new and as good Priest is gonna get with the new cards. Next up, I have 3 Hunter decks that I want to show you. 2 of them were actually made by myself that I've yet to test, but I'm trying my best in order to see what kind of value we can get from the Discover cards, because Discover Hunter absolutely has to be good. This kind of card, you cannot print this card and make Hunter bad. I refuse to believe that they finally pushed my favorite archetype of Hunter, which is like a not aggro Hunter, And this card has to be good. If it's not good, I'm gonna go to Blizzard. I'm gonna storm the HQ, dude. Heed my words, Blizzard. There will be a good Discover Hunter deck, and I will find it. And as of right now, people are trying to best support this archetype with the Discover package with eggs, because you still have really good consistency from your beasts. You can discover cards from your deck like your Mystery Egg or your Yodeler in a pinch in order to try and enact those synergies that are very, very crucial. But one other thing to keep in mind with this deck is that there actually is another version of Hunter that is running around right now. And the only reason why I don't have it in the list is because I'm not really sure how exactly to build it. But there are some people that are literally trying to play Ranjari Scout into Grifta, so that way you can Grifta into the 6 damage, and if you do this, you're technically discovering the card, so you get another copy of the deal 6 damage from the Ranjari Scout, and if you're mad enough to play the card and then play Pupil with it, then the Pupil can give you essentially up to 4 extra copies of the deal 6 damage. So you can have 6 deal 6 copies of the deal 6 copies. Oh god, that's a lot of that's a lot of 6s in the word. Someone call the Catholic Church and scare them with the scary number. But yeah, this is something that you could technically do, but I don't have this in the list because it is extremely inconsistent, extremely finicky, and well, this deck just works better because you still have Vigor Jormungandr, Absorbent Parasite, and Beastal Madness in order to enable that Hollow Hound win condition, which is probably still the best way of playing Hunter personally. You just catch a lot of decks off guard, and your opponent always has to be wary of this if you are playing the combo. And there's a lot of Hunters that are running some very greedy decks right now, like I'm about to show you. So this version of Starship Hunter is actually a deck that I saw on ladder and I changed up a little bit, and I gotta be honest, I just really don't like the Dimensional Core in this deck. But the main reason why it actually finds its way here is because we just need our Starship to have as much damage as possible. So if we're gonna get extra copies of Starship pieces like, you know, Dimensional Core, Biopod obviously being the most important one that you want to get copies of, as well as Specimen Claw, just getting as much pieces as possible to make the biggest ship possible to deal as much damage as you can is very, very important. So I usually don't like Dimensional Core because it doesn't really fit the deck, but in this particular version of the deck and in Starships, it does kind of work out. And you also have cards like Laser Barrage, so just having extra ways of getting these cards online is very good. But you're doing the typical Hunter Discover stuff. You're playing Ranjari Scout into tracking to try and get extra copies of the Starship pieces, and then once the ship is big enough or you have enough Biopods, you can play Yelling Yodeler in order to double up that Death Rattle and just absolutely steamroll the game. And one other thing to keep in mind that I feel like is absolutely core in a deck like this is Ceaseless Expanse. Because if you are lucky enough to be able to play the Ceaseless Expanse to remove the entire board for 0 mana, and then you could launch the Starship into Yelling Yodeler, that is probably going to be the most consistent way that you can pop off this kind of combo. Because I'm gonna be honest, dude, I went up against a Hunter that had a 21 attack Starship with 2 Biopods in it. They played Yelling Yodeler, but because I was playing Armor Druid, even that didn't kill me. That's the funny thing about Hunter, because everyone was like, you know, what if you just launch the Starship and just play Yodeler? It should be game over, right? Well, it's not that simple, and there's a reason why Starship Hunter is having a little bit of a slow start this expansion, because the things that we thought were good are good, but they're not good into the decks that we're seeing more commonly on ladder. So the deck is pretty decent, but it gets countered by the amount of armor that you're seeing because you really need to get those extra copies of Biopod, and if that doesn't happen, it feels like an uphill battle. And the last version of this deck is actually a viewer deck by Guitar Rafa. That's right, I'm giving Guitar Rafa another shout out with his Hunter decks, because he has been very, very adamant that this is the best version of Starship Hunter. And there's one reason for it. There might be one card that you're noticing. It's the Ravenous Kraken. But are you really thinking about why this card is in the deck? Is it because it's like a cube and you can kill your Starship and when it dies you get an extra copy of it? No, 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 my dear friend. You want this out of the Mystery Egg, so you can get it for 0 mana. So that way you can launch the Starship and you can get even more value out of it. And imagine if you could play Yelling Yodeler on this thing. Now we're using our Giger Brainer Gamer. Oh my god, dude. This is just how you're supposed to play Hearthstone with these kind of ideas. Like the one of in this deck in order to support the Mystery Egg, so that way you can actually support the minions that you want to kill a little bit more effectively. This is absolutely genius. And the only reason why I haven't played it is because I'm scared of getting decimated on ladder with Starship Hunter, because I've been playing a at top 1000 legend for the past week. We're no longer at top 1000 legend. We threw our ranks very effectively yesterday by doing some fun meme content. So make sure you check out the Twitch channel because we're not just about top legend gaming. We like to have fun every now and again. And with this deck, we'll eventually give it a try. But I gotta give a huge shout out to Qatar Rafa because he keeps giving me decks and I keep not playing them. So at least putting them in the video, more people will play them and maybe more people will understand the power of just how good Ravenous Kraken can be. And next up on this list is probably going to be the weirdest deck that honestly, I couldn't tell you how to play this. I have played this deck 3 games and I went up against an armor deck 3 times in a row. Does that sound familiar to you? Does that bring back any Nature Shaman King-like memories where we just kept going into every single armor deck when playing Shaman because it would happen? So I'm gonna give a quick rundown of this deck even though I really don't understand what exactly is going on here. However, there's already been an updated version of this deck and I will go ahead and show both of them here and include both deck lists. So originally I had 27 decks. I think I now have 29 decks in this video that I'm going to be showing you guys. So let's go ahead and talk about it, oh boy. So the whole point of this deck is that we are trying to play tempo, right? We have Salesman, we have First Contact, we have, Grove Fence, we want to play minions on the field, but we also have cards that are trying to burst our opponent throughout the entire game with cards like Spirit Claw. So what I imagine this deck is trying to do is that we are trying to play the aggro game plan and burst down our opponent as much as we can with like a big gigantic combo in mind to where we have like Ethereal Oracle, Lightning Bolts, as well as Zappers into like Overdraft, for example. So what I imagine this deck is trying to do is to play Ethereal Oracle and Zappers, or maybe you just play Zappers and you just use the Ethereal Oracle to draw instead, but you have double Zapper into Lightning Bolts, into Pop-Up Books, into Overdraft, and even like Malted Magmas maybe you could use in this way. But the one thing that I kind of find particularly troubling with this deck is the lack of mana cheat and the lack of like, how exactly am I can't deal 30 damage with this, so I'm wondering what the maximum potential of this deck is, because I imagine this is just, play your minions, try to stick, a bunch of damage and hit face, and then you have a gigantic combo that will hopefully split that diff. Very simple to what, Nature Shaman used to do. However, now that we've talked about this, apparently, according to Donkey, this is his most updated version of this deck right here, and it kind of makes a little bit more sense because now we're putting cards in like Gold Panner, for example, for extra card draw. We have still the 1-drop package in order to just play minions and go face and try to be a little bit more productive. We even now have the Ultraviolet Breaker, which deals 3 damage to a minion and shovels asteroids into your tier deck. So I imagine that we're adding this for even more possibilities from our spell damage. Again, not really sure how effective this deck is and how good it's going to be, but Donkey and other players are actually starting to experiment with Burn Shaman, and it's working surprisingly well. And remember when I told you about Nature Shaman? Apparently, Nature Shaman has made a comeback. I can't believe it either, honestly. So this was an idea that one of my viewers actually told me about where like, you could run Triangulate in order to give you extra copies of like Lightning Reflexes, for example. So you could just use this to get extra copies of like the damage that you need. So when you play your your Flash of Lightning, it is absolutely game breaking. Not really sure how necessary Fizzle is, but in this armor land of Hearthstone that we're currently in right now, it could kind of make sense. But this just looks like very similar to what Nature Shaman used to look like, and I just thought it would be really funny to showcase in this particular deck because apparently there are some people that are trying to bring this deck back, and I will be trying this eventually, but I got a lot of decks that I have to go through, and honestly, I am not excited about the idea of playing Nature Shaman and then hating everything as soon as I queue into a Warrior again, because again, Odyn Warrior is like the number 2 deck right now. I can't play Nature Shaman. I'm gonna queue into Warrior, guys. You know how this works out. And last and certainly least for the Shaman decks is Asteroid Shaman. And I'm calling it Asteroid Shaman because, oh boy, did this deck blow butt cheeks, dude. It just doesn't work, unfortunately. And I think it's because it's way too slow. And sadly, with all the armor decks that are running around, not only do they have a lot of life that you have to push through, but they have lots of minions and lots of stats. And like, it's really cool that you can play Shutterblock, for example. You can play Shutterblock into the Bold Tide Behemoth in order to give your asteroids even more damage. And it's really sad. I thought this deck would be absolutely game-breaking on the first day of the expansion. I thought that Elemental Shaman would be just as good as Elemental Mage, but the difference between Elemental Shaman and Elemental Mage is that the OTK for Mage is significantly easier and technically just better in every single way. Like, there's so much setup that you need for the Shaman deck to where you don't have like an explosive turn out of nowhere. You actually have to win with your minions and with your asteroids by buffing them, and when that doesn't happen, what do you do then? Like, you have Hagatha in order to draw like Frosty Decor and Meteor Storm. You can kind of push tempo in a meaningful way, but not really. So it's like, this deck is all in on the rocks being gigantic and hitting the right targets, and sadly, this is like a 30-40% win rate deck, and I really thought that this would be one of the best cards in the expansion, and it's kind of sad that asteroids are falling flat, so to speak. And now we are finally here at my favorite point in the video, where we are going to be talking about the DK class. Because, oh my dear lord, if you are a DK player right now, you have too many options. It's literally that meme where it's like, I already have a full stack of pancakes and you're gonna give me like 3 other plates? Like, dude, we have Rainbow DK, we have Double Blood Unholy, we have Double Unholy Blood, we have Double Frost Unholy. There are so many different archetypes and different ways of playing DK right now, and most of them can support the Starship archetype very effectively. So we're kind of looking at like what I would argue is like one of the weaker ones right now, but I thought it was really funny to take a look at Magatha in this particular list, because unfortunately we are still running Airlock Breach and Mining Casualties, so if you give an Airlock Breach up to your opponent, oh boy, is that bad. But I thought this deck was really funny because the idea of supporting Starships by just drawing through the deck very quickly does kind of make a lot of sense, because you just want those big combos to where you play Magatha on turn 6, and then, or I'm sorry, you play this on turn 5, and then maybe on turn 6, you can play like, you know, Buccaneer into like your Soulbound Spire or like your Defense Crystal, for example. So it's like, there is some potential for this deck. Do I think it's the best Death Knight? No. Do I even think it's the best Rainbow Death Knight? No. Do I think it's the best Starship DK? Absolutely not. But it's still a deck that we can play, and I just found it very hilarious, and I wanted to share it with you guys just to show how diverse DK really is right now. And up next, we're going to talk about my Frosty Ship deck, which is the very first deck that I played in this expansion. It's probably not, this is probably just going to be the best 30 of the deck because it's very simple to build. And there's really not other like flex cards that I really want to put in here, because this is just pretty much the deck. It has the typical Frost, you know, starter with like Harbinger of Winter, Frost Strike, Horn of Winter, as well as your Marrow Manipulator in order to give us the right distribution of runes and the right cards to support them, as well as the Rezka because we're running Yelling Yodeler. Why wouldn't we do that? But the rest of the deck is just literally, you know, either tempo tools like Miracle Salesman, Dreadhound Handler, and then the rest of the deck is just, you know, like Starship pieces. So the whole point of this deck is that you're trying to just tempo out your cards, and you might have like a big Starship possibility of high rolling your opponent because you have Horn of Winters to enable the Yelling Yodeler combos a lot more effectively, and you're going to summon a bunch of minions in the process. This will be our next deck guide, so again, if you like this kind of content, subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified about those deck guides when it comes out, because we have a lot of deck guides we'll be covering because there are just so many archetypes to be exploring right now. Oh my god, I don't have time to make a video over everything I want to make a video of. I literally don't have enough time. I don't even have editors to help me out with this. They're already got a lot of jobs on their plate. But yeah, Double Frost Unholy looks like the best. This looks like the best way of playing this archetype in general if you want to make their starships work, and specifically this rune requirement. But I would argue it's a pretty fun deck, and it can win games in a very meaningful way, especially if you're not in Legend yet. This might be a great deck to try and climb to like the Diamond ranks, for example. Would highly recommend it. Next up, we're taking a page out of Theo's book, and we're going to see if it's possible to make Assimilating Blight into a good card. Because with this card in particular, you are not only discovering a 3-drop, you are discovering a 3-drop with Death Rattle, and then you're giving it Reborn, so you're always getting some sort of really good value because you have a lot of 3-cost Death Rattles. The most important ones being your Chillfallen Baron and your Soulbound Spire. All the other cards are like kind of neutrals, like a Floppy Hydra, for example. I don't think you want to pick a Floppy Hydra. There might be some situations where you get, I think it's Messmaker. It's the 1/3 taunt with Lifesteal and Death Rattle, deals 1 damage to the entire board. That could get you out of a pretty sticky situation sometimes. So Assimilating Blight does have some ways to where it can be pretty decent, but it's one of those cards to where you have to run double Unholy in 1 blood, so you don't get to run cards like Corpse Explosion or like Soul Stealer, for example. So how exactly do we support a deck like this? Well, we just play all the control tools that are available to us, and somehow this deck actually works to where I had a pretty decent win rate with this, and Theo was climbing in, I believe, top 300 EU with this particular deck. So you still have the typical stuff that, you know, Starship Death Knight is known for with the Brittle Bump Buccaneer, the Soulbound Spires, and the Arcanite Defense Crystals. But more importantly, you have some important tech cards like Hell Yeah, which was just put into every single DK deck in order to deal with Quasar. You have Airlock Breach to give you some extra time and durability. You have Ceaseless Expanse, Yogg, and Ziliax as very important control tools in the DK class. And the Maladark, I feel like, is a little weird. I'm not really sure if this really deserves a spot in the deck, but every now and again, being able to cheat out a big 8-drop can make a pretty big difference in my opinion. So this is just one of those decks to where it looks kind of lackluster, but once you're behind the wheel and you really start, you know, launching the Starship for what it's worth, it does do a lot, and this is a deck that I do kind of, you know, I'm saddened that it doesn't run a Yodeler, but because we are trying to focus on surviving first rather than building up a big board, it does make sense that we have all the control tools possible in order to, you know, survive to the best of our abilities. And next up is another double Unholy Blood deck, but the reason why I wanted to show off this deck is because this is a bit of a, I don't want to say it's a meme, but it's like an idea of trying to support Starship DK in the best way possible, because we are talking about cards that are good with double Unholy, right? Well, if we take away some of the control tools and we try to play a little bit more proactively and for the board, we can run cards like Soul Searching, Plague Grain, as well as Aconite Death Speaker, so that way we can really milk the value out of every single Starship piece that we can get our hands on. But obviously, this deck is a lot more, you know, finicky and a lot more likely to die. I would say that there might be a possibility of putting in a Threads of Despair just because of how important this particular card can be in certain matchups. So maybe if you want to fit this card in here, you could take out one Aconite Death Speaker because two of them feels like a bit clunky, and maybe you could take out a Chill Fallen Baron in order to put it in the Threads of Despair if you're really wanting to try and make this kind of deck good. But I love the idea of trying to make Soul Searching good, getting extra copies of the Starship pieces, or even like an Exeter would be really funny. But yeah, we're trying to make the idea of getting extra copies good and Reborn good, but unfortunately, this is just one of those decks to where if you don't have enough control tools, it does just kind of fall apart. I'm going to, for the sake of consistency and to not confuse myself, just leave the deck as it was, but I would highly recommend that if you want to run a control tool in this deck, that adding a Threads of Despair is probably going to be absolutely necessary. Next up, we have what is debated to be the best Rainbow DK in the entire game, and it is all due to the fact that we are trying to play XR Mandark, as I like to call him. We're gonna call him Mandark for the rest of time. I don't care if his name is Maladar or Maladir or whatever the hell it is. Maladar these nuts, bro. But yeah, the whole point of this deck is to play Mandark into the Climactic Necrotic Explosion, not just because it's gonna deal a whole lot of damage, but because it's gonna summon a gigantic board out of nowhere to where you can deal like, you know, like 8 damage and summon like 4/4s or something like that. I don't know exactly how it would distribute. But the first time I did this, I think I dealt 7 damage and summoned a bunch of 4/5s. So that was pretty effective. And there's one other thing to keep in mind is that if in the other situation where you do need to wait and throw this when it has a lot of damage, you can literally use this as like that last ditch effort to bump up this card and just like if your opponent's sitting at 25 and this is sitting at 23, just do it. Play the Mandark, play the Climactic Necrotic Explosion, and pray to God that you don't miss that 2 damage, because man would it suck if that didn't happen. But you have that, and in order to support the high roll on turn 6, we are running cards like Mining Casualties, Acolyte of Death with the Crop Rotation Synergy, and even like Rainbow Seamstress, because we just need as many corpses as possible before turn 6, to where even like playing Mon Paw on turn 4 and having it die, so that way you can play the Mandark as quickly as possible, really can make a difference with this particular deck. But the one thing that kind of sucks about it, it's very dependent on the early game curve. You have the Salesman, Handler into like, you know, Mining Casualties. Maybe you play like Acolyte of Death and they trade the casualties away. Play Seamstress, you know, Hell Yeah, Mon Paw. This is just a deck that is really dependent on you having those early game curves and having that 1, 2, 3, 4 curve, because it's just how important it is. And if you don't have that, this deck can kind of fall apart, because if you have a bunch of these more expensive cards, they can't really be played. So this is just one of those things to where every single time I see like a Rainbow DK at high legend that does like the Acolyte crop rotation, I'm a little bit on edge on believing just how good it truly is. But the one thing that you do got to keep in mind is that the crop rotation gives you minions, so that way you can play the Mandark as quickly as possible. So do I think that this is the best Rainbow DK? I don't want to say yes right now, but I am going to say yes right now because this really is the best Rainbow DK that I have seen since the expansion has gone live. And as we continue on with the interesting DK decks, we are now talking about Double Blood Unholy because there's only one card that we care about to play in this deck. It is the 8 Hands from Beyond. I crafted this card golden, and oh boy, was that a mistake, because this card is not as powerful as I thought it would be. Now, I don't want to dissuade you guys from playing this archetype, but I am going to be straightforward in telling you that this is not going to be the end-all be-all card. This is not going to be the end-all be-all card that you thought it was originally, because unfortunately, I have lost more games playing 8 Hands from Beyond because I've enabled my opponent's archetype better. Case in point, the very first time I played this, I went up against a Wheel Warlock and I destroyed their Furnace Fuels, and then they drew 4 cards from their deck and then proceeded to have every single card that they needed for the rest of the matchup to absolutely make my life a living hell. Not to mention that my deck really doesn't have a win condition, so going up against Wheel Warlock is not exactly the greatest thing in the world either. But there are a lot of situations where I played this card and it just wasn't even that good, even when I played it with Cattle Rustler. So I just gotta let you guys be aware of this, because if you're on the edge of crafting this card and you have exactly 1600 dust or not a lot of resources, I would recommend that you don't do it unless you just really want to play this deck, because this deck effectively is just a Razzle Dazzle DK with control tools. That's pretty much all it has really going for it at the moment, and we know how good Buttons DK is at the moment. Maybe not exactly with this rune distribution, but this is still an archetype you can have some success with. And in case you are going up against some other slower players and you do have an opportunity to play the 8 Hands from Beyond, you gotta do it at least once. You gotta see how fun this card can be from your perspective, because I know that destroying your opponent's deck is very unoptimal, but I have lost more games playing this effect than I have actually won, because sometimes your opponent just has the exact cards that you need in order to come back from a bad situation, and you actually make their card draw a little bit more consistent if you think about it. So it has that going against it, kind of. But again, Razzle Dazzle DK, you play a bunch of cards to help yourself stay alive. When it's time to play the 8 Hands from Beyond, you can do that. And then after you play the 8 Hands from Beyond, you have Kill Jaden, Primus, Ziliax, Ceaseless Expanse, a Corpse Explosion as like control tools in order to keep your opponent absolutely off the board, so you can eventually wear them out in Fatigue. But are you going to wear them out in Fatigue very consistently? Not really. But if you want to play this deck because this card is really fun, I would highly recommend it, but do not craft this card if you think it's a legitimate meta breaker that will help you grind to legend a lot easier. Oh god, I don't want to do this. Oh god, I don't want to do this. Oh god, I don't want to do this. You'll never catch me crafting Reno. It just won't. I don't have enough dust for it, guys. Sorry, I can't craft Reno at the moment. I just don't have the dust or the money in order to make this card. What can I say? It's just too expensive. But I had to talk about freaking Reno in this video because Rainbow Death Knight with the Highlander archetype is actually the most common of Death Knights, and it drives me crazy. It drives me crazy. Actually, this is probably the second most common, because the most common is Frost Unholy Buttons DK within the Diamond through Legend ranks, because that's just still an effective deck that a lot of people are playing with success. But oh my dear god, I don't want to talk about this deck. I mean, what do you want me to say? It has every single card that we've seen in other decks except the Reno, the Eridar Brute, and the Marin. Every other card that we've seen today has been in another DK deck. So it's like, I guess what happens when you just put them all together and it just works. I'm never gonna take a Reno deck seriously, but the fact that it's actually making it into this video might be, you know, enough reason for you guys to try this if you really want to play Reno DK. It's control DK essentially with, like, you know, unpredictable factor, because you're playing Highlander. By the time that your opponent figures that out, you're playing Reno and they just can't stop it. So this deck was probably very effective at being the fun police on the very first day of the expansion by Renoing away all of the starships. But Reno itself has gone down in popularity by a very significant percent, to where this really is the only Highlander deck that I'm seeing people play that's actually good. All the other Highlander decks are completely non-existent except for Highlander Warrior, which also has a trash win rate. So it's like, I am willing to give Reno one spot in this video in order to rant about it, first of all, but in order to tell you that Reno decks are getting weaker, but there is still one of these little decks that just won't go away. And now the last deck that I need to show you guys, and this deck will have a video about it. There is an insanely funny Reddit post that was made a couple of days ago after Quasar Rogue popped off, to where a Reddit user ended up posting this deck as Poetic Justice against Quasar Rogue, where the whole point of this deck is to literally concede on ladder over and over and over again until you see a rogue, so you can specifically bully them with cards like Cult Neophyte, Razor's Scale, Speaker Stomper, Lumia, and even a Cold Feet in order to deny every single play that they could possibly make. However, I have to say one thing about this deck. It's not good. It's not a good deck. Even by its definition of trying to counter specifically Quasar Rogue, it doesn't even do that effectively. Because one thing that I have to point out is not just a copy of the Demolition Renovator to destroy the location, which would be utterly hilarious if you did that in a real game. But this guy was so angry when making this deck, to where he actually put in a Libram card in this deck, and I actually changed it out because I couldn't believe it, and I played this deck on ladder. So let's take out this, and let's put in the actual card that he put in here. He put an Interstellar Wayfarer in this deck with literally no Librams in the entirety of the archetype, because I believe this guy was just so mad when he was making the deck list that he wasn't seeing straight, and this was the final 30 that he ended up coming up with. There will be a video talking about this deck in particular to really just like drive home how hilarious this post was. But if you guys browse the Hearthstone Reddit and you know, put some comments put some comments down below and tell us just how crazy the Poetic Justice line was. Oh my god, it went so hard. And so after seeing this deck, I tried my best to finalize on this particular list, which is just really Pipsi Paladin, but bad. Pipsi Paladin with tax cards in it. And I literally went up against, I think, 3 rogues in 25 games after conceding almost every other game that because we could not win legitimately. We played this deck like 5 times, and then after it being obvious that we couldn't beat a rogue, we just literally started conceding until we started seeing rogues, and we only saw 3 after 25 games. So unfortunately, we did not get the Poetic Justice that we really wanted. There will be a video showcasing our defeats and our failures, but this is just a really funny list that I would not recommend that you play. But this was my attempt at trying to make a deck that just absolutely hates Quasar Rogue in every single fashion, to where you run every single tech card possible that actually can be good against it. So yeah, if you want to hunt some Quasar Rogue, play this deck, concede on like a ladder floor at like, you know, D5 or something, only go up against rogues, and be the gatekeeper that Hearthstone wants you to be. But there you guys have it. Those are my top 5 decks within the meta and what you guys should be playing right now. And I feel like I did a very good job not only showing you the old decks that are still good, but showing you some new decks that are having some, you know, some emergence, you know, they're kind of emerging a little bit. They're finding their way into the meta, as well as showing you guys a very funny meme that I will be posting in a future video. So hopefully you guys enjoy this content. Go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you somehow made it this far. If you did make it this far, let's see what to type in the comments. Let's type in Lumia is bae. There we go. Lumia is bae, even though the card is not really that good, but it's just another mommy that goes into Pipsi Paladin. So thank you guys so much for making it to the end of this deck breakdown. Hopefully you use one of these decks to have some fun or to grind the ranks, and if you have any success, feel free to let me know in the comments below, and we'll see you guys for the next video.